5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and I am working on stuff like the review of the last Blue Oyster Cult album and other things. But first, gotta finish this. The last issue of Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong is out. It might have been out for a little bit. I don't know. I was kind of unsure about the release dates because it seemed like they kept changing. But I got my hands on, as you can see, 3 alternate covers, as usual. And I'm here to talk about how it ended. Not to front load things, but I feel like on some fronts, the last issue really delivered, and on other fronts, I'm not entirely sure. So as far as things that I can say for certain did work, first of all, of course, Kong getting the Green Lantern ring from the late Guy Gardner, obviously that's pretty cool just on its own, and makes for a good cover as well. And the way he utilizes it to instantly summon the axe, I mean, I feel like they maybe could have done a little bit more of having him figure out how it works. Like, you know, he gets the ring, he doesn't know what it does, a skullcrawler lunges at him, he raises his hand, and it runs into a shield, and that's when he puts together, oh, so that's how it works. And he at first maybe summons a tree and starts just sort of batting around the skullcrawlers like it's nothing until Godzilla and Superman show up, and then he thinks, oh, right, I should probably upgrade, and then does the axe. That could have added a nicer little arc to it. But just on its own, seeing Kong get the Green Lantern ring and get to be a Green Lantern for at least a little bit, that was pretty neat. And it makes sense he would get a ring like that because, I mean, you know, he is a pretty willful character in the monsterverse. No other ring would really make sense. Obviously, yellow, orange, and red are all the villain colors. Blue is hope. That wouldn't really fit with him. And pink is love, which may be the Peter Jackson King Kong, but not the monsterverse one. So I do think it actually made sense, especially considering that, you know, there's been some debate regarding other DC works recently that people have been saying it feels like whoever's writing this stuff doesn't really care about how the rings work. This, I think, actually does make sense within the context of the DC universe. Also, as far as that new Super Skullcrawler goes, I don't know if we've actually decided on a name for it yet. It doesn't get a name in the issue itself. I have complex thoughts about it, but I will say, from a design standpoint, it looks really good. You can tell it's a Skullcrawler, but something is clearly not right about it. And this is regarding a species that's already not right. So by being able to take that design and make it even crazier, I think at least that worked. And of course, you know, there's all kinds of pages throughout this thing that any one of them you could frame because they look so good. Godzilla and Superman arriving in Metropolis, you know, those are all some good moments. And every single DC hero gets to shine. The villains, not so much. We know they're there, but they don't really have much of a presence, so you'd be forgiven for forgetting they were there in the first place. But the heroes, I would say each hero gets at least one panel where they get to be cool. So, no disappointments in that regard. Overall, though, I do still feel like there's some stuff here that could have been better. So like I said, they could have handled Kong getting the Green Lantern ring a little bit better, like giving him a bit more of an arc finding out how it works. But I think even worse than that is the fact that as soon as the fight is over, the ring just leaves. It just flies off of his finger. Because I guess they couldn't think of any other way to get rid of it? I don't know. I've never seen that happen with a Green Lantern ring before. The ring chooses its owner So you would think it would take quite a Herculean effort to get it away from that owner, particularly if that owner is the size of a skyscraper. I realize that they can't have him bringing the ring back with him to the monsterverse, but, you know, couldn't there have been a better way than just having it suddenly pop off and fly away? I don't know. It feels like if they were going to have that be the case, then why didn't it just do that in the first place when instead it went to him? That's a minor thing, though, compared to what else I'm going to talk about. Now, I said that the new ultimate Lazarus Pit Skullcrawler devil thing works on a design level. But in terms of the story, what does it really add other than being one more thing to deal with? First of all, I can confirm that the League of Assassins deliberately reviving it makes no impact on the story at all. It really doesn't make a difference. And in fact, I don't even think it should have been part of the story, considering how little of an impact it has. Like, they easily could have had it just fall into the Lazarus Pit by accident, or there could have been something where it fused with Doomsday or some other DC entity, or any number of different comic book rationales you could think of, because heaven knows there's no shortage of them that people would just accept because it's a comic book and with superheroes and crazy stuff in it. But by having it be something done by the League of Assassins, I mean, that implies that they're doing it for a reason, because Ra's al Ghul's in charge, presumably. He is a man who always has some kind of a plan, and then he has plans within plans in order to make sure that they somehow get the result he wants. You don't just... He's not the sort of guy who would just take a random skull from another universe and go, hey, let's dip it into my revitalization immortality juice and see what happens. It just didn't feel right, but that's not even the worst of it. See, I get what the new monster represents conceptually. It is a fusion of the worst things from both universes, and therefore that's the justification for the heroes of both universes to join forces, right? Here's the problem. We already had that by way of Lex Luthor controlling Mechagodzilla. The smartest villain of the whole DC universe against one of, if not the most powerful titans, albeit an artificial one, from the monsterverse. That's already a pretty deadly combination right there. It fulfills the requirement of the worst parts of both universes coming together. And, considering it's Lex Luthor and Mechagodzilla specifically, you would think that would be even more of a justification to have Godzilla and Superman team up, because they would be facing their arch nemeses at the same time. You know, considering the fact that they didn't have access to King Ghidorah, I'm guessing. But instead, Mechagodzilla gets taken out of the fight, like, halfway through the book, I think. It's well before Godzilla and Superman show up in Metropolis. And of course, without Mechagodzilla to control, Lex Luthor can't really do anything else in the fight. So, you know, it feels like the selling point, because it's on so many of the covers, was shoved aside for something that arguably could have been neat because it was new, but it didn't necessarily contribute anything that the team-up of Lex and Mechagodzilla didn't already bring to the table. So, yeah, that felt like kind of a jip. I mean, you promised that and then it didn't deliver. Although, speaking of Godzilla and Superman, that might be the thing I take the biggest umbrage with. Because the way the story was structured, they were both out of commission for a good chunk of the story. Superman since issue 2, and Godzilla, I think, since issue 4 or 5, if memory serves. Whatever the case, they were both in positions where they had to basically get caught up to speed as best as you can catch Godzilla up to speed on something, and then they have to get to Metropolis in time to make a difference. that was the promise, at least. Like, you were going to have this moment where the Justice League was getting overwhelmed, and even Kong couldn't make much of a difference with his ring, and that's when the Man of Steel and the King of the Monsters come in, and they're going to turn the tides. Instead, they show up when the fight is practically over, and the only opponent left is the mutant Skullcrawler from the Lazarus Pit. Credit where credit is due, they managed to arrange the finale of the fight so that it's Godzilla, Superman, and Kong with the ring taking that creature down pretty much all at the same time. But still, like, part of the promise here was that Godzilla and Superman, after clashing in the early issues, were going to be fighting side by side at the end, and they barely even did. I guess technically they still did, but like, it wasn't really enough, I don't think. And that's partly because they spent so long out of commission. They could have easily brought Superman back a little bit sooner, I think. I think that's the main issue here. They spent so long having us convinced that he was dead, even though we knew he wasn't, that by the time they do bring him back in the final issue, he basically has to speed through all these different things to wrap up a few other loose ends that he would be able to, the few loose ends that the book actually remembers, and then somehow go to get Godzilla and lure him there. And by the time he manages to do all that, there are only a few pages left. So if they had just stopped messing around with that and admitted that Superman was alive sooner, and they didn't have it be this big, oh, is he alive or is he dead thing, maybe that could have been fixed. I mean, as it is, we do still get to see them fighting as allies, or at least as close as they can be to allies, but it just didn't feel like it had the same impact it could have, because there just wasn't enough of it. In the end, and this is just my first impression, having read each of the issues individually, separated by weeks at a time, I feel like Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong didn't end as strong as it began. Like, yes, taking into account that the first issue of it was all build-up, it still had a much stronger beginning, with setting the premise of these giant monsters have suddenly appeared in the DC universe, and there's literally no precedent for them ever, but like these specific kinds of creatures. So how is the Justice League gonna handle that? That was a really neat idea, but as it progressed, it just got more and more complicated, perhaps overly complicated, to the point where by the time we get to the end, I don't want to say it was rushed, because I don't think it was, but like, obviously certain things just either petered out, like Gorilla Grodd controlling Kong, or they didn't really matter in the first place, like the League of Assassins reviving the Skull Devil because reasons, or they seemed like they were going to be important, and yet they fizzled out kind of in an underwhelming manner, like Lex Luthor controlling Mechagodzilla. I don't know. Maybe now that I have everything together, and with the trade coming out soon, I can go back and read it all as one continuous story, one right after the other, and I can see how that affects it, like having everything in place as opposed to having one chapter at a time and then waiting to see what happens next. But I don't know. At this point, I feel like if I were to rank Godzilla's comic book crossovers as of late, I would say Godzilla vs. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is still at the top of all-time best, with, I don't know how I would even put Marvel, because like Marvel ran for a much longer time. It had way more room to breathe, but I guess that would have to be second, because it actually does explore the concept as thoroughly as it can, and it was given the space to do it. And right now I would place Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong third. Not a distant third, but still third. Which is too bad, really, because I'm a huge DC fan, and I'm a huge Godzilla fan, so putting these guys together should have been really epic. I suppose I am still happy that the book even exists in the first place, because this is the sort of crossover that we all, as kids, wanted to see happen, and we didn't understand why it probably wasn't going to happen until we got older and we learned that, oh, there's a reason there are different logos on things, and that actually prevents crossovers more often than it allows them. So having this opportunity where you have Godzilla movies being distributed by Warner Brothers, who also own DC, and they used that to figure out a way to actually put Godzilla and King Kong and the DC superheroes all in the same book together, and also somehow managed to bring in Mechagodzilla because I'm pretty sure they licensed the movie, which is how they got around that. I mean, that in itself is still really impressive, but is the book itself as impressive as the premise warrants? At this point, I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it's a bad crossover, but I guess given the players involved, I expected a little bit more. But like I said, this is just my first impression, having had weeks separating my reading of each issue. So maybe I'll read it all in one sitting again. Well, maybe not one sitting, but like I'll read it as it was intended, as one continuous story. Maybe come back and do a full, in-depth review to see what else I can extract from it. For now, though, I gotta say, it started stronger than it ended, as I said. I suppose there's always a chance that they could do a sequel. I mean, Godzilla vs. Power Rangers is getting a sequel after all, so who knows. But ultimately, I think I'm a bigger fan of the concept than I am of the book itself. But that's just where I stand at this point. Either way, I've got some really cool official artwork that I can get frames for to hang somewhere in my home, and you can better believe I'm gonna do it. Anyway, those are just my thoughts on it, and you can share your thoughts down in the comments if you have read this issue. I guess that's it for now, until I do a proper review of the whole thing. So until such time as that happens, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.